Hi, Pre-K. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Bible story that we're going to be working on for the rest of the week. When Jesus was here on earth, we've talked about this before, he often taught people by telling them a story. The story that he told that we're going to learn about now has to do with sheep. He told the story about this shepherd. He said once there was a shepherd, and he took care of 100 sheep. He knew each sheep by name and knew little things about them. He knew them well. He liked to talk to them. And then in the morning, he would check his pasture and make sure that the ground was smooth and there weren't any holes and the grass was still growing good. And he would make sure that they got to eat at the places where the grass was greener and they got to drink where the water was fresh. He took very good care of his sheep. He would always watch out for them and make sure they had a smooth path to walk. Sheep as a whole, here's a picture of our shepherd, they don't see real well. And so he would make sure that he showed them where they should go. He made sure that there were no lions or bears or other wild animals that might be hiding and want to harm them. He often used his rod and his staff to protect the sheep. And he always kept his eyes and his ears open. He loved his sheep very much. And sometimes one of the lambs wouldn't obey the sheep and they would go off their own way. But each time they did that, the good shepherd would go look for the sheep and bring it back to keep it safe. So that's where we're going to stop today, about the story of the sheep. And I'm also going to read to you from one of the Psalms, Psalm 23, where the Bible tells us that God is the shepherd. Jesus is like the shepherd. So it says, the Lord is my shepherd. There is nothing I lack. He lets me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He renews my life. He leads me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even when I walk through the darkest valleys and fear no danger, the Lord is with me. His rod and his staff, they comfort me. You, we're talking about God now, prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies, and you anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Only goodness and faithfulness will pursue me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord as long as I live. That Bible verse is from Psalms 23. It's a very common Bible verse. When I used to teach first grade back in Chicago, I always had my first graders memorize that verse, and it was right around this time of year that they did that. There's one thing about sheep. Mr. Ritter and I lived on a sheep farm for a year. God gave us all kinds of interesting things in our life. And one of the things about sheep is that they follow each other without even really knowing what they're following. So it was very common for one of the sheep to jump as it left the barn, and then the one behind it jumped, and the one behind that one jumped. And pretty soon 3 or 4 sheep had jumped when they left the barn. Now what were they jumping over? We would look, nothing. The first one had just jumped. And they all followed. And sometimes people think that's probably why God calls us his sheep, because we all seem to do what each other does, whether it's a good idea or not. So that's one thing. God is the shepherd, and we are his sheep. He watches out for us and protects us, just like the shepherd in this story. Tomorrow we'll learn what happens when one of the sheep does what it wants to do instead of what the Lord would have the sheep do.